Think of Russia for a moment and watch what arrives. A flag. A map shaded a single color, edge to edge. A headline. A man at the end of a very long table. Snow and grey concrete and the sense of a place that is mostly a threat and mostly the same in every direction. The picture is not wrong exactly. The headlines show what they show, and they are not lying about it. But they are showing you one room, and the house is the size of a continent. This is the largest country on Earth. It crosses 11 time zones. When the sun comes up over its eastern cliffs above the Pacific, it will not reach the western border for another 9 hours. You could fly across this country for a full working day and still be inside it when you landed. And inside that space live close to 190 different peoples. They speak different languages. They pray to different gods or to none. They herd reindeer or fish through ice or count their wealth in animals rather than money. Most of them have never appeared in a headline in their lives. And somewhere in the middle of it, in a forest so large it has no real edge, there was once a family that did not know what country they lived in. They had walked into the trees in 1936 to escape a government. They stayed so long that when strangers finally found them, more than 40 years later, they had to be told that a war had come and gone, that men had walked on the moon and returned, and that the empire which had driven them into the forest had quietly begun to fall apart without them. They had outlasted it. They simply had not been told. We will come back to that family. We will come back to them at the very end, because the country the headlines never show you is not a secret. It is just too large to fit inside a headline. It is older than the politics laid over the top of it, and stranger, and far more alive than anyone tells you. So set the map down. Set the flag down. What is actually here, across all 11 time zones, under all that snow? The answer does not begin in a city. It begins with water, the oldest, deepest water in the world. In the south of Siberia, ringed by mountains, there is a lake called Baikal. From the air, it looks like a crack in the planet, a long blue crescent, nearly 400 miles from end to end. That is more or less what it is. Baikal sits in a rift, a place where the crust of the earth is slowly pulling itself apart. And into that widening wound, the water has been gathering for somewhere between 20 and 25 million years. That makes it the oldest lake on Earth. Every other lake fills in eventually, with silt, with weeds, with time. Most die within a few 100,000 years. Baikal has refused. It is still here, and because the rift is still opening, it is still, very slowly, growing deeper. It is also the deepest lake in the world. Its floor lies more than 1,600 meters down, over a mile of cold black water beneath the surface. And held inside that one lake is roughly a fifth of all the unfrozen fresh water on the planet. More than all 5 of North America's Great Lakes combined. One lake, one valley, one country. A fifth of the world's accessible drinking water sitting in a single crack in Siberia. But the number that stays with you is a smaller one. You can look into Baikal and see down 40 meters. In a lake this old, this large, holding this much life, the water should be murky. It is instead almost unnervingly clear. clear enough that in winter, a coin dropped through a hole in the ice stays visible far past the point where it should have vanished into the dark. Something is keeping it clean, and for a long time, that was the lake's quiet riddle. A lake this ancient should be choked with its own history. This one washes itself. The answer is alive, and it is almost too small to see. The animal is called Episcura. It is a copepod, a translucent crustacean, a distant relative of the crab and the shrimp, except that it is barely 1.5 millimeters long, the size of a grain of rice. It lives nowhere else on Earth but this one lake. It feeds by filtering. It draws the water in, strains out the algae and the bacteria, and lets the clean water go. A single Episcura does almost nothing. But there are trillions of them drifting through the entire column of the lake, and together they make up the overwhelming majority of its living matter. They filter Baikal's waters again and again and again, year after year, for as long as anyone has been able to measure. The clearest Great Lake on Earth is kept clear by an animal you would never notice. Remove it, and the water clouds. 25 million years of clarity held up by something the size of a grain of rice. And the lake made stranger things than that. Cut off for millions of years, Baikal evolved a world of its own. Close to 2,000 species found nowhere else on the planet. The strangest of them is the Nerpa, a seal, a freshwater seal, the only true one in the world, living in a lake more than 1,000 miles from the nearest sea. No one is entirely certain how its ancestors arrived so far inland, so long ago. They came somehow, they stayed, and in the isolation, they became something the open ocean never made. In winter, they keep breathing holes open in the ice with the claws on their flippers. In spring, they haul out onto it by the thousand, dark commas scattered across a white field that stretches past the horizon. In winter, the lake performs something close to engineering on its own. From January, Baikal freezes over, 1 meter of ice, hard enough to drive a truck across, so clear in places that you can lie down on it and look straight into 40 meters of water beneath your own face. Pressure cracks split the surface for miles, with a sound like distant thunder rolling under your feet. Gas, rising from the lakebed, freezes into stacked silver discs, caught halfway through their escape. And along the shore, ridges of shattered ice pile up and catch the low sun like broken turquoise. Beneath all of it, the water stays alive. Most deep lakes go dead at the bottom. The lowest water sits still, loses its oxygen, and nothing can live down there. Baikal does not. Twice a year, as the surface cools to the same temperature as the depths, the entire lake quietly turns itself over, carrying fresh oxygen all the way to the floor more than 1 mile down. It is why creatures live at the very bottom of Baikal, in the cold and the dark, where in almost any other lake on Earth, there would be nothing at all. None of this is guaranteed to last. The Episcura that keeps the lake clear cannot survive in warm water, and the water is slowly warming. For half a century, a paper mill stood on the southern shore, pouring its waste into the cleanest water in the world, before public anger finally forced it shut. Baikal is protected now, and revered and visited. And still, like everything in this country, it carries on under a weight it did not choose. The oldest lake on Earth has outlasted ice ages and earthquakes and the slow turning of whole geological eras. Whether it outlasts us is a different question, and an open one. To the Buryats, the people whose homeland this is, the lake was never only water. The Buryats are a Mongol people, more than 400,000 of them, and they have lived along these shores far longer than there has been a Russia to draw them onto a map. Their lake is not a resource, it is closer to an elder. Olkhon, the great island at its heart, is one of the most sacred places in the Buryat world, a center of shamanism where the spirits of the lake are understood to dwell, and where for centuries people have come to ask the water for things and to thank it. That is the first correction this country asks of you. You arrive thinking of Russia as Moscow, as Europe, as a single people facing west. And here, 2,500 miles east of the capital, are Buddhist temples and shamans' poles strung with ribbons, and a Mongol people who measure their belonging to this land not in centuries, but in the age of a lake. They are not a footnote to the country. They are one of nearly 200 answers to the question of who, exactly, is Russian. Because that is the thing the single-colored map hides most completely. Spread across this land are peoples whose lives look nothing like the one the headlines imagine. There are the Saka, close to 500,000 of them, in the Republic of Yakutia, a region the size of India with almost no one in it. Their horses and their cattle somehow survive winters that fall to 60 below zero. In the village of Oymyakon, the coldest inhabited place on Earth, the temperature has been recorded at nearly -68. The ground is frozen so deep and so permanently that the dead can be difficult to bury, and food is kept in cellars carved straight down into the permafrost, a freezer that has never once, in 10,000 years, switched off. How do you build a life at 60 below? Carefully and together, and with a respect for the cold that outsiders take years to learn. Cars are left running for months because an engine that stops may never start again. Children still go to school until the thermometer drops past a certain unthinkable line. The Saka did not move somewhere warmer. They stayed, and they worked out how to live where almost nothing else can. And the cold has not made them grim. Each summer, when the sun finally returns and the land turns briefly green, the Saka gather for Isyak, a festival of the sun, of fermented mare's milk and round dances that run for hours under a sky that never fully darkens. The same republic holds another kind of wealth, deep underground, some of the richest diamond deposits in the world. At Mirny, Soviet engineers dug an open pit so wide and so deep, over 1/2 kilometer straight down, that aircraft were eventually forbidden from flying above it for fear the draft of the hole itself could pull them in. A land of 60 below, dancing in the brief warmth, sitting on a fortune of buried stone. Further north still are the Nenets, the reindeer herders of the tundra, around 45,000 of them following their herds across the top of the world, much as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. When the season turns, they fold up entire households. The chum, a great cone of reindeer hide and wooden poles, load them onto sledges and move. Not for a holiday, for survival. The reindeer need new pasture, and so the people go where the reindeer go, across a frozen land with no fences and no roads. Among them, wealth has never been counted in money. It is counted in animals, in the size of the herd you can keep alive through the long dark. A family with 3,000 reindeer is wealthy. A family with none, whatever else they own, is not. At the eastern tip of the country are the Chukchi, almost close enough to see Alaska, hunting walrus and whale along the same coast their people have worked for thousands of years. In the forests are the Evenki. 41 of these peoples are recognized in Russian law as small-numbered indigenous peoples, meaning each one is fewer than 50,000 strong, holding on to a language and a way of living that the modern century keeps quietly offering to replace. How long can a way of living like that last, pressed on every side by a world that does not understand it? Hold that question. We will need it again at the end. To understand how all of this became a single country, you have to follow one line drawn straight across it. The Trans-Siberian Railway runs 9,289 kilometers from Moscow in the west to Vladivostok on the Pacific. It is the longest railway on Earth. A train leaving the capital takes the better part of a week to reach the far coast, crossing 8 time zones, 100 rivers, and the southern shoulder of Baikal itself. Crews began laying track from both ends at once in 1891, working toward a meeting point thousands of kilometers away, through forest, swamp, and permafrost, in a land that at the time had almost no roads to bring them supplies. It took them 13 years. Around the southern tip of Baikal, where the mountains drop straight into the lake, engineers had to blast and bore some 200 tunnels and galleries through solid rock to get the line past the water. When the gap finally closed in 1904, the railway stitched a scattering of distant outposts into something that could, for the first time, be governed as a whole. The railway is the spine of modern Russia. Almost everything that came after, the cities, the industry, the long reach of the state into Siberia, followed the rails east. To ride it now is to feel the size of the country in your body. Days pass at the window, birch forest, then open steppe, then more birch forest, the same horizon for hours, broken only by a station where babushkas sell smoked fish and hot potatoes to passengers who step down for 4 minutes and climb back aboard. The train does not hurry. It cannot. The distance is simply too vast to be hurried, and after a day or two, you stop expecting it to. It carries coal and timber and oil west and people east, and it has done so without ever really stopping for more than 100 years. At the very end of the line, some 9,000 kilometers from where it began, the rails finally halt at Vladivostok, a port city of steep hills and long bridges and naval grey on the edge of the Pacific, closer to Tokyo and Seoul than to Moscow. There, Russia runs out of land at last, and the country stands looking east across the water toward Asia. But not every length of track in this country was laid by people who would ever be allowed to ride it. We will come to that. First, follow the line all the way to the end, past the rivers, past Baikal, out to where the land itself runs out into fire. Beyond the last cities of the east, the continent throws out one final limb into the Pacific, a peninsula the size of a country hanging off the edge of everything. It is called Kamchatka, and almost no one lives on it. Kamchatka is one of the most volcanic places on the planet. There are around 300 volcanoes here. 29 of them are still active. The largest, Kluchevskaya Sopka, rises nearly 5 kilometers straight out of the surrounding land, the tallest active volcano in the northern hemisphere, and it has been erupting on and off for thousands of years. The reason is buried far beneath the coast. Out in the Pacific, one great slab of the Earth's crust is sliding down beneath another, dragging ocean rock into the heat of the deep. That rock melts, and the molten stone forces its way back up to the surface as a line of volcanoes. It is the same mechanism that built the whole rim of the Pacific, the Ring of Fire. Kamchatka simply sits on one of its most active stretches. And here is the contradiction of the place. A land of fire that is also, for most of the year, a land of snow and fog. A coast where the ground steams while the rivers run cold, where bears the size of grizzlies fish for salmon in the shadow of mountains that could one day bury them. Deep in the peninsula's interior, there is a valley you cannot drive to. 6 square kilometers of ground where the heat of the volcanoes reaches the surface as water. Geysers, columns of boiling steam fired out of the rock, mud that bubbles like a pot left on the stove, hot springs in every color that minerals can paint. In 1941, a geologist named Tatiana Ustinova is working her way up a frozen river by dog sled when she feels a gust of warm air where there should be none, turns and finds a jet of scalding water firing straight out of the snow. She has just discovered the Valley of the Geysers, one of the largest geyser fields in the world, and until that moment, no one beyond the local people knew it was there. In 2007, a landslide roared down the valley walls and buried much of it under rock and mud. The geysers stopped. For a while, it seemed the valley was simply gone. Then, in 2013, a second landslide cleared the dam the first had left behind. The water found its way back to the surface. The geysers began to fire again. The valley had reset itself, the way this whole country seems to. Covered over, written off, and then, quietly, back. The bears here are the largest in Eurasia. Kamchatka brown bears, close cousins of the Kodiak, the biggest of them weighing as much as a small car. Each summer, they line the rivers shoulder to shoulder as the salmon run, scooping fish out of the white water by the hundred. And those salmon feed far more than the bears. The carcasses the bears drag into the trees rot down and fertilize the forest itself. The whole green peninsula, in a sense, grows out of the bodies of fish. A land of fewer than 4 people for every square mile belongs, more than to anyone, to the bears. The few people who do live on Kamchatka have been here a very long time. Long before Russian fur hunters reached the peninsula in the 17th century, it belonged to the Itelmen and the Koryak, peoples who built their lives around the same salmon the bears depend on, drying fish for the winter, keeping sled dogs, reading the moods of the volcanoes that framed their world. Their numbers were terribly reduced after contact, by disease and by force, and yet they are still here, still fishing the same rivers. The capital, Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, sits on a bay ringed by snow cones, one of the most dramatically placed cities anywhere on Earth, and even now, reachable from the rest of the country only by sea or by air. There are no roads onto Kamchatka. There never have been. South of the volcanoes, where the Far East softens into deep forest, lives an animal that the 20th century very nearly erased. The Amur taiga, the Siberian tiger, is the largest cat on Earth. A big male can stretch over 3 meters from nose to tail and weigh 300 kilograms. It is built for cold, the way no other tiger is. A heavier coat, a layer of fat across the flanks, broad paws for the snow. It moves through a northern forest where no one, anywhere else in the world, expects to find a tiger at all. By the 1940s, there were perhaps 30 of them left. 30. A century of logging, of trophy hunting, of poaching for the markets to the south, had run the population down to a number that in almost any other case means the end. 30 animals, scattered across a forest the size of a nation, is not a population. It is a countdown. In 1941, a biologist named Lev Kaplanov who has spent years tracking these cats on foot through deep snow, finishes a survey and sounds the alarm. At this rate, he warns, the Amur taiga has only a few years left. He pushes for a complete ban on hunting them. He will not live to see whether it works. Within a few years, he is murdered in the forest by poachers. But the warning lands. In 1947, the Soviet Union bans taiga hunting outright, one of the first countries in the world to give a great cat that kind of protection. And slowly, against every expectation, the count begins to climb. 100, 200. Today, something close to 600 Amur tigers move through these forests, very nearly the entire wild population of the subspecies on Earth, brought back from 30. It did not happen by hope. It happened because a man counted the animals, named the number out loud, and the number was acted on in time. That is the shape of survival in this country, again and again. Not a miracle, a decision, made before it was too late. Now turn north, far north, above the Arctic Circle, to a place the maps can barely label. The Putorana Plateau is a wilderness of stacked black basalt, cut by ancient lava into a maze of flat-topped mountains and sheer gorges, threaded with more than 25,000 lakes and some of the tallest waterfalls in Asia. There are no roads in. To reach it, you fly, and then you walk, and then there is simply no one. It is one of the largest tracts of genuinely untouched land left anywhere in the northern world. The rock itself is a record of one of the worst days the planet has ever had. Around 250 million years ago, this corner of Siberia tore open and bled lava across an area the size of a continent, one of the largest volcanic events in the history of the Earth. It poured for hundreds of thousands of years, and it is widely believed to have helped trigger the greatest mass extinction life has ever suffered, when most species on Earth died. What you are looking at on the Putorana Plateau is the cooled and weathered floor of that catastrophe. Today, it is silent, and it is one of the most beautiful places in Russia. And every year, across it, moves one of the last great animal migrations left on the planet. Hundreds of thousands of wild reindeer flow over the plateau with the seasons, the largest such herd in the world, following the same routes their ancestors have walked since the ice withdrew. No fences, no herders, just the oldest pattern in the north, still running in a place almost no human eye will ever see. It is worth sitting with that. In the most thoroughly mapped century in human history, this country still holds rooms that no one has walked into. And it holds others a person could spend a lifetime in and never finish. Far to the west rise the Caucasus Mountains and Elbrus, the highest peak in all of Europe. South lies the Altai, where Russia, Mongolia, China, and Kazakhstan almost touch, and where some of the oldest human remains in the region have been found. Northwest, Karelia, a country of lakes and white summer nights along the Finnish border. East, the long island of Sakhalin, and running through the heart of European Russia, the Volga, the longest river in Europe, the mother river of half the country's history. Each of these could carry a film of its own. And consider the rivers. 3 of the longest on the planet, the Ob, the Yenisei, and the Lena, run the length of Siberia, draining a third of the entire country northward into the Arctic Ocean. They are so vast that they bend the seasons around themselves. Each spring, the ice in the warmer south melts first, sending floodwater rushing north against a river mouth that is still frozen solid, and the water backs up and spreads across the flat land in some of the largest floods on Earth. A slow, annual drowning of the tundra that arrives on schedule every single year. Whole landscapes here are built around a calendar written in ice. But the same emptiness that protects the reindeer of the north was, within living memory, used for something else entirely. Far to the northeast, in the basin of the Kolyma River, the land is some of the most beautiful in all of Russia. Endless ridges in 100 shades of blue, rivers the color of cold steel, a silence that runs on unbroken for hundreds of miles. It is also one of the great graveyards of the 20th century. Under Stalin, this region became the heart of the Gulag, the vast system of forced labor camps the Soviet state used to punish, to silence, and to mine. Prisoners were carried here from every corner of the country, first by train along the Trans-Siberian, then packed into the holds of cargo ships for a week at sea, then unloaded at the port of Magadan to be scattered into camps spread every few miles across the frozen interior. And they were set to work building a road. The Kolyma Highway runs some 2,000 kilometers inland, and it was laid down by hand, in the cold, by prisoners, across permafrost and swamp and mountain. So many died in its making, of cold, of hunger, of exhaustion, of execution, and were buried in or beside the roadbed itself, that the road earned the only name it has ever truly needed. They call it the Road of Bones. This is the other half of the railway's story. The line that stitched the country together in the west fed, in the east, into something that consumed the people it carried. One of those people was a writer named Varlam Shalamov. He survived 17 years in these camps, and he wrote them down, plainly, without decoration, because the facts did not need any. He understood something about that place that is hard to hear. A person, he wrote, stayed human only as long as they remained ready, at any moment, to refuse, even at the cost of everything. It was that readiness, and almost nothing else, that the camps could not take. Hundreds of thousands of people died in this cold and beautiful country, and the land simply went on being beautiful above them. There is no silver lining to offer here, and it would be a kind of lie to reach for one. On a hill above Magadan stands a great concrete face, weeping, looking out over the bay where the ships once came in. It is called the Mask of Sorrow. It is one of the few places in this country where the past is allowed openly to grieve. And here is where we should finally talk about the Russia you already know, because it is real, and it is here, and it deserves its place in the picture too. There is Moscow, 11 million people, the painted domes of St. Basil's, the red walls, the long table you have seen on the news. There is St. Petersburg, the city Peter the Great raised out of a northern marsh 3 centuries ago to face Europe. Its canals, its palaces, the Hermitage holding some 3 million works of art behind a single green facade. This is the Russia that gave the world Tolstoy and Tchaikovsky, the Bolshoi, and the first human being ever to leave the planet. This is the Russia the cameras point at. It is extraordinary, and it is real, and it is, more or less, the western doorway of an eastern country, a doorway so often photographed that most of the world has mistaken it for the whole house. Everything we have just walked through lies behind that doorway. The oldest lake on Earth, the peninsula of fire, the forest with the taiga in it, the road built of bones, the plateau no one has crossed. All of it, east of the postcard, past the place where the headlines stop. The map shades it a single color because a map has no other choice. But there is no single color large enough to be honest about a place this size. But before we go and find the family we began with, and we are close now, there is one more thread to follow. Because the reason they walked into that forest was not the cold, or the distance, or the taiga. It was faith. For most of 1,000 years, the thread that ran through Russian life was the Orthodox Church. Onion domes over every town, icons in the corner of every home, a faith carried up from Constantinople 1,000 years ago and woven so deeply into the country that for long stretches of its history, to be Russian and to be Orthodox were very nearly the same sentence. Then, in the 1600s, the Church reformed itself. It changed a handful of rituals, the way the faithful crossed themselves, the spelling of a holy name. Small things on paper. But to a great many believers, they were not small at all, and a whole body of them refused. They would not change. They were called the Old Believers, and for the next 3 centuries, they were hunted, exiled, and driven to the furthest edges of the country for the crime of praying the old way. When the Soviet state arrived and declared war on religion itself, the Old Believers did what they had always done. They went further, deeper into the forest, the tundra, the mountains, anywhere the hand of the state could not easily reach. Hold that in mind. We are about to walk into that forest. And consider what was done to one of the holiest places in the whole country. Out in the White Sea in the far north sit the Solovetsky Islands, and on them a monastery founded more than 500 years ago. A fortress of faith on the edge of the Arctic, where monks had prayed through the worst winters the country could send. Under the Soviets, that monastery became one of the very first camps of the Gulag. A place built for prayer turned into a place of punishment. The bells fell silent. The prisoners arrived. It is the same dark trick this country keeps playing on itself, the sacred and the terrible, raised on the very same ground. And yet the faith did not die. Travel east today to the shores of Baikal, and you will find the Buryat's great Buddhist temple, the Ivolginsky Datsan, its prayer wheels turning in the cold. Inside, it rests one of the strangest objects of devotion anywhere in the world, the body of a lama named Itigelov, who sat down to meditate in 1927, instructed his students to bury him, and died. Decades later, by his own request, he was lifted from the ground again, and his body was found remarkably whole, as though he had merely paused. To this day, the faithful come to sit in his presence. A country the headlines paint as godless concrete is, beneath the surface, one of the most spiritually layered places on Earth. And consider, while we are here, what else this single country has given the world. The same land that built the Road of Bones produced Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, whose novels still sit on shelves in every language there is. It produced the periodic table, sketched out by Dmitry Mendeleev, the map of the elements that every chemistry student on the planet still learns. It put the first satellite into orbit, and then the first human being, a young man named Yuri Gagarin, who in 1961 became the first of our species to look down on the whole Earth from above. None of that excuses the camps. The camps erase none of that. Both are true at once of the same place. That may be the hardest thing to hold about this country, and the most important. It will not collapse into a single story, however badly we want it to. Which brings us at last back to the forest, and to the family who walked into it. The forest has a name, the taiga, the great boreal forest that wraps the very top of the world. In Russia, it is almost beyond comprehension. Close to 10 million square kilometers of pine, birch, and larch, running from the Ural Mountains to the Pacific, from the Arctic tundra down toward the border with Mongolia. It is the largest forest on Earth. You could lose every country in Europe inside it and still have room to spare. For most of the year, it is locked in cold and silence. Snow lingers into May. The cold comes back by September. The rivers freeze solid. A person could walk into this forest and not see another living soul for 1,000 miles. In 1936, a man named Lykov walks into it on purpose. Karp is an old believer, one of those same families who had spent 3 centuries being driven to the margins of the country for praying the old way. Under Stalin, that persecution turns lethal. Churches are closing, believers are vanishing. And one day, at work in the fields, Karp watches a patrol shoot his own brother dead beside him for nothing more than their faith. So he gathers his wife, Akulina, and his 2 small children, and what little he can carry, a few seeds, a spinning wheel, some simple tools, and he walks into the taiga. He does not intend to come back. They go deep, deeper with the years, retreating from every trail, until they settle in a fold of the Sayan Mountains, roughly 250 kilometers from the nearest other human being. 2 more children are born out there, in the forest. A boy, Dmitri, and a girl, Agafia, who will not lay eyes on another person outside their own family until they are grown adults. And then the world, very slowly, forgets that they are there at all. They live as though it were 3 centuries ago. They wear clothes spun and woven on the loom Karp had carried in on his back. When the cloth wore through, they patched it with bark. They eat what a small cleared patch of mountainside and the forest will give. Potatoes, rye, pine nuts, whatever Dmitri can take. He grows into an extraordinary woodsman, able to track game barefoot through deep snow for days, and to spend nights in the open in cold that would kill most men. In the worst year, a hard frost takes everything they have planted, and the family begins to starve. Akulina, the mother, gives the last of the food to her children and dies of hunger. The rest live on shoe leather and bark and whatever the forest can spare. Through all of it, they keep the faith. By candlelight, from a single ancient Bible and a few worn prayer books, reciting words older than the country they had fled. They have no idea that the country has fought and survived the largest war in human history. No idea that men have left the planet and walked on the moon and come safely home. No idea even of who now rules, or that the terror that drove them into the trees has begun, on its own, to fade. In 1978, a helicopter is sweeping low over the southern Siberian forest, carrying a team of geologists hunting for ore. From the air, on a steep mountainside where there should be nothing at all, a pilot sees something that cannot be there. A clearing. Long, straight furrows. A garden, cut by hand, 150 miles from the nearest other human being. They land. They climb up. And out of a low, soot-blackened hut steps an old man in patched sackcloth, and behind him, his grown children, who shrink back from these strangers and speak a Russian so worn and slowed by a lifetime of isolation that at first it sounds less like speech than a soft, blurred cooing. The geologists have to explain the 20th century to them, that there was a war, and it is over, that the country is now one of the 2 great powers on Earth, that the world they fled has changed beyond recognition, and that the family, here in the trees, had quietly outlived the worst of it, without ever once being told. A journalist named Vasily Peskov would spend years afterward visiting them, and it is largely through him that the world came to know their story. The small astonishments of it. That the family had never seen a material that bends without breaking. Handed a sheet of cellophane, they marveled at glass you can crush. That they had reinvented, alone, in one mountain hollow, 100 quiet skills the rest of us long ago handed over to machines. This was the family we began with, the Lykovs, the people who walked away from an empire in 1936 and were still alive in their forest as that same empire entered its final years, never once having heard its name spoken in fear, because for them it had simply ceased to be. Within a few years of being found, most of them were gone. The 3 grown children died close together in 1981. The father, Karp, in 1988. Of the 6 who had walked into that forest or been born inside it, only one remained. Her name is Agafia. She was born in the taiga in 1945 and had never once seen the outside world. After her family died, the offer was open and it was kind. Come out, live among people, be warm and safe and fed. She stayed. She is still there, an old woman now, alone in the same fold of the Sian Mountains, tending the same ground, keeping the same faith by the same candlelight, more than 80 years after her father first led the family into the trees. People reach her a few times a year by helicopter. They have offered again and again to bring her out. Each time, she shakes her head. Asked once whether she was ever lonely out there, she said no. A believer, she answered, is never truly alone. That is the country the headlines never show you, gathered into a single human being. Not a flag, not a threat. A woman in a forest the size of a continent who outlived an empire without noticing, and who offered the entire modern world, looked at it, and chose the trees. We began with a question. What is actually here, across all 11 time zones, under all that snow? Some of the answer is the largest of things. The oldest lake on Earth, holding 1/5 of its fresh water, kept clear by an animal too small to see. A forest you could lose a continent inside. A road built of the dead, and a railway that stitched 100 scattered outposts into a single nation. The largest cat in the world, carried back from 30 animals because one man counted them in time. But most of the answer is smaller and quieter and far harder to photograph. It is a shaman on a sacred island, speaking to a lake. It is a Nanette's family folding a reindeer hide tent and following the herd north because their grandparents did. It is a number of reindeer that counts as a fortune. It is a lama who sat down to meditate and never quite left. It is an old woman who would not come out of the forest. How long can a way of living like that last, pressed by a century that does not understand it? The honest answer is that no one knows. Some of these languages will not outlive the people who speak them now. Some of these herds are already thinning. The modern world is patient, and it is everywhere, and it is in no hurry at all. And yet, here is what the sheer size of this country teaches, if you let it. It has been written off before, by its own winters, by its own rulers, by the rest of the world's certainty that it was only ever one thing. And every single time, somewhere east of the headline, past the place the cameras stop, something kept going. A lake that should have filled in. A valley that came back. A cat that should have vanished. A family that outlasted the empire that hunted it. The map will go on shading it a single color. It has no other choice. But you have seen now a little of what that single color is hiding, and you will not quite be able to unsee it. There is far more here than any one journey could hold. 11 time zones, 190 peoples, a forest with no edge. We have only stood in the doorway and looked east. If you would like to keep looking at the places behind the headlines, the ones too large or too quiet to ever make the news, then stay with us and travel a little further next time. Take a breath. The country is still out there, under all that snow, far more than anyone ever told you. Until the next journey.